Sometimes I think about that trip, that whole week, and it still feels like a bad dream I can't quite shake. Not a nightmare exactly, more like a waking hallucination that just slowly bled into everything, staining it. It started out normal enough, if you can call driving 8 hours up into the Sierras in late November normal. We were heading for a rental cabin near Lake Tahoe, a place Tyler had booked months ago for a long weekend, a kind of pre-winter getaway. But Tyler never showed up. That's why we were there actually. Not for the getaway, but to find him. He'd stopped answering his phone a couple of days before we were supposed to leave, which wasn't like him at all. Tyler was meticulous, almost pathologically so that if he said he'd be somewhere, he'd be there. If he had plans, he stuck to them. When Maya called me, her voice tight with worry, saying she hadn't heard from him in over 48 hours, I knew something was wrong. Maya, bless her, was always the first to worry, the first to act. That she'd been Tyler's girlfriend for, 3 years? And a good friend to all of us. That she'd already called the local sheriff's department, but they couldn't do much without a more concrete lead than a missed check. So, she rallied the troops. Dylan, Marcus, Vanessa, and me. We were the search party. The cabin itself was a rustic affair, tucked away off Emerald Bay Road, just past the turnoff for Eagle Falls. It was one of those older places, built into the hillside, surrounded by pines so thick they blocked out most of the sky. The air was crisp, already smelling of snow, and the silence out there was heavy, not peaceful but weighty, like the sound itself had been absorbed by the trees. We pulled up in my old SUV, packed to the gills with flashlights, emergency supplies, and a gnawing sense of unease. Maya was in the passenger seat, her brow furrowed, her usually bright eyes shadowed. Even under the stress, she looked striking. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, but a few strands had escaped, framing her face. She had these high, flawless cheekbones, and her lips, usually so full and expressive, were pressed into a thin line. She was wearing a thick cable-knit sweater that still managed to hint at the curve of her chest beneath, and a pair of jeans that hugged her hips perfectly. I tried not to stare really, but my eyes kept drifting, especially when she shifted, her thigh brushing against mine as she reached for the map. It was a weird, almost shameful thing to feel that little flicker of awareness, that purely physical pull, when we were out here looking for our missing friend. But it was there, a persistent hum beneath the dread. Dylan, bless his pragmatic heart, was already out of the car, pulling his jacket tighter against the cold. All right, let's get this over with, he said, his voice trying to sound confident, but I could hear the tremor in it. Marcus, ever the quiet one, just nodded, his gaze sweeping the cabin and the surrounding woods, looking for, what exactly? A sign. Vanessa, usually so bubbly, was pale, clutching her phone like a lifeline. She was wearing a thick parka, but I could see the way her jeans stretched over her calves as she walked, the fabric tightening with each step. Even her sneakers looked a little too clean for this kind of expedition. We unlocked the front door. The key was under the mat, just like Tyler had said it would be, and stepped inside. The air was stale, cold, and smelled faintly of pine cleaner and something else. Something metallic, almost. The cabin was exactly as Tyler had described it. A main living area with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and a narrow hallway leading to 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. Everything was neat, almost too neat. No signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, nothing out of place. It was like Tyler had just vanished. He definitely stayed here, Maya said, her voice a little breathless as she ran a hand over the rough-hewn wooden mantelpiece. His duffel bag is gone, but, look. She pointed to a half-empty coffee mug on the kitchen counter, a ring of dried coffee at the bottom. He never leaves dishes out. Her voice cracked a little on the last word. I watched her, the way her shoulders slumped, the way her hair fell forward, obscuring her face. My chest tightened, a strange mix of sympathy and something else, something less noble. I wanted to reach out, to touch her, to offer comfort, but I just stood there, my hands shoved deep in my pockets. We fanned out, each taking a room. Dylan and Marcus checked the small shed outside and the perimeter of the property. Vanessa went through the kitchen cupboards, looking for any notes, anything at all. I took the master bedroom, the one Tyler usually preferred. It was sparse. A queen-sized bed, a dresser, a small nightstand. I opened the dresser drawers. Empty. The closet too. Nothing. That I knelt down, peering under the bed, my flashlight beam cutting through the dust motes, dancing in the faint light filtering through the window. Nothing. Just as I was about to stand up, my knee bumped against something hard and small tucked against the far wall. That I reached for it, my fingers closing around a smooth, cold rectangle. That it was a phone. Tyler's phone. My heart gave a jolt. Why would he leave his phone under the bed? He was practically surgically attached to the thing. That I pulled it out. The screen was dark, but it wasn't cracked or damaged. That I pressed the power button. Nothing. Dead battery probably. Guys, I called out, my voice echoing a little too loudly in the quiet cabin. I found his phone. Under the bed. Maya was there in an instant, her eyes wide, hope and fear warring in their depths. Let me see. She practically snatched it from my hand, her fingers, usually so delicate, surprisingly strong. She tried the power button, then the volume keys. Nothing. It's dead, she whispered, her voice deflating. Completely dead. Well, that's something, right? Dylan said, coming back inside, Marcus right behind him. At least we know he was here, and it gives us a starting point that we can charge it up, check his call logs, GPS data, anything. We found an old charging brick and cable in one of the kitchen drawers, probably left by a previous renter. Maya plugged it in, the small charging light on the phone glowing faintly. We all gathered around, watching it, as if its revival would somehow magically bring Tyler back too. The percentage slowly crept up. 1%, 2%, 3%. That it felt like an eternity. After about 20 minutes, it was at 10%. Enough, we hoped, to get some information. Maya unlocked it, she knew his passcode of course, she scrolled through his recent calls, his messages. Nothing suspicious. The last call was 2 days ago to his mom. The last message was a text to Maya herself, confirming his arrival at the cabin. Wait, she said, her finger hovering over the screen. Look at the photos. She tapped the gallery icon. There were a few pictures of the cabin, some scenic shots of the lake, typical tourist stuff. Then a series of photos taken in rapid succession, all blurry, all dark. They looked like they were taken in the middle of the night or in a very dark room. What are these? She murmured, zooming in on one. It was almost impossible to tell what it was. A wall? A ceiling? A patch of shadow? Suddenly the phone vibrated in her hand, startling us all. A call. From an unknown number. We all looked at each other, confused. Who would be calling Tyler's phone now? Maya hesitated, then answered. She put it on speaker. Hello? She said, her voice a little shaky, static. A low hum, like a distant engine, then a faint, almost inaudible click. Hello? Maya repeated, a little louder. More static. Then a sound, not a voice, not exactly, more like a whisper of air. A breath, and then it hung up. That was weird, Vanessa said, hugging herself. Probably a wrong number or a telemarketer. But who calls a dead phone? Marcus mused, ever the logician. It was off, under the bed, for 2 days. We tried calling the number back, but it went straight to voicemail. A generic, automated message. No name. We decided to keep searching the cabin more thoroughly this time, looking for anything Tyler might have left, any clue. Dylan and Marcus went back outside, determined to scour the woods within a half-mile radius. Vanessa and Maya took the other bedroom and the bathroom. I went back to the living room, trying to make sense of the empty space. I was standing by the large picture window looking out at the darkening woods, when I heard it. A faint ringing. It wasn't Tyler's phone, that was still on the kitchen counter charging. This was different. Higher pitched, a little tinny. It sounded like a phone but muffled, distant. Did you guys hear that? I called out. Silence. Then Maya's voice from the hallway. Hear what? A phone ringing, I said, turning. Sounded like it came from the wall. Dylan and Marcus came stomping back inside, shaking pine needles from their jackets. Hear what? Dylan asked, his breath misting in the cold air. I thought I heard a phone ringing, I repeated, feeling a bit foolish. From inside the walls. They all looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Must be the wind, Marcus offered, though there was no wind to speak of. But then it happened again. clearer this time. A distinct ring, and it definitely came from the wall next to the fireplace. We all froze, listening. The sound was unmistakable. A phone, and it was inside the wall. Okay, I definitely heard that, Vanessa whispered, her eyes wide. Maya rushed over to Tyler's phone, which was still charging. It's not this one, she exclaimed, holding it up. It's not ringing. The ringing continued, a steady, insistent sound, coming from somewhere within the plaster and wood. It was Tyler's ringtone. We all knew it, a slightly obnoxious, upbeat pop song he'd had for years. How is that possible? Dylan stammered, his face paling. There's no phone in the wall. Unless, Marcus said slowly, Tyler somehow dropped his phone into the wall? Like through a vent or something? He started tapping on the wall, trying to pinpoint the source. The ringing seemed to emanate from a spot about halfway up, near the ceiling above the fireplace. But we just found his phone under the bed, Vanessa pointed out, her voice rising in pitch. The ringing stopped as abruptly as it began. We stood there in stunned silence, listening to the heavy quiet of the cabin. My heart was pounding, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. Maya was gripping her arms, her knuckles white, her lips, usually so full, were now a pale, thin line, and her eyes, those beautiful, expressive eyes, were wide with a terror that mirrored my own. I could see the pulse throbbing at the base of her throat, a frantic little butterfly. Okay, Dylan said, trying to take charge. This is weird, but there has to be a logical explanation. Maybe it's a pipe or, I don't know, an old intercom system. With Tyler's ringtone? I countered, my voice tight. Suddenly Tyler's phone, still on the kitchen counter, lit up. Another call. Unknown number. Maya stared at it, her hand hovering. Should I answer it? Dylan urged. Maybe it's Tyler. Maybe he found another phone. She answered, putting it on speaker again. Hello. Static, that same low hum, and then a voice. Hello? It said that it was Tyler's voice, his exact voice, but it was off, flat, monotone, like a recording. We all gasped, a collective intake of breath. Tyler? Maya whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Is that you? Where are you? The voice repeated, hello? Still flat, still monotone. Tyler, it's Maya. Are you okay? Where are you calling from? Silence. Then the voice again, but this time, it was different. It sounded like Maya. Her voice, her exact inflection, but it was cold, empty. Hello? Maya stumbled back, dropping Tyler's phone. It clattered to the floor, still on speaker. The voice from the phone, Maya's voice, kept repeating, hello? Hello? I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cabin's temperature. It was like a cold hand reaching into my chest and squeezing my heart. This wasn't Tyler. This wasn't Maya. This was something else, something mimicking them. Dylan knelt down, gingerly picking up the phone. Who is this? He demanded, his voice trembling. The voice on the phone, still Maya's, replied, who is this? This is Dylan. Where is Tyler? What are you doing with his phone? The voice switched. It was Dylan's voice now, his exact voice. Who is this? We all backed away, pressing ourselves against the far wall. Vanessa let out a small whimper. Marcus looked like he was about to throw up. Maya was openly sobbing, her hands pressed over her mouth, her beautiful face contorted in fear. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the phone, from the small, innocuous device that was now speaking in our own voices. It's not Tyler, I said, my voice hoarse. It's not him. Dylan, his hand shaking, hung up the call. The cabin fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was a silence that felt watchful, expectant. We need to get out of here, Vanessa pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. Right now. But Tyler? Maya started, her voice thick with tears. What if he's still here? If he's here, Marcus said, his voice grim, then whatever just answered that phone, it's with him. We argued for a few minutes, the fear making us irrational. Maya was adamant we couldn't leave without Tyler. Dylan wanted to call the sheriff again, but what would we tell them? That a phone inside a wall was ringing, and Tyler's phone was answering in our voices? They'd think we were crazy or on drugs. Eventually Dylan, always the most practical, convinced us to at least go outside and try to get a signal for a proper call to the authorities, away from whatever was in the cabin. As we stepped out into the twilight, the air was even colder, and the shadows of the pines stretched long and skeletal across the ground. The cabin, with its warm, inviting lights, now seemed like a trap. We stood huddled together, our breath pluming in the frigid air. Maya was still trembling, her body pressed close to mine for warmth, or maybe just for comfort. I could feel the soft curve of her hip against my side, the subtle pressure of her arm against mine. Even in this terrifying situation, my body was reacting, a strange, primal awareness of her closeness, a desire to protect, to possess, that felt almost grotesque given the circumstances. I could smell her shampoo, a faint floral scent even. Over the sharp smell of pine. It was a dizzying mix of fear and a wholly inappropriate arousal. I hated myself for it. Dylan was trying his phone, then Marcus, then Vanessa. No signal. The cabin was in a dead zone, something Tyler had always found charmingly rustic. Now it felt like a cage. Just then we heard it again, the ringing. From inside the cabin. Tyler's ringtone. It was fainter now, as if the phone had moved further into the walls or deeper into the cabin. "It's calling again," Maya whispered, her eyes fixed on the cabin. "It's inside." We stood there, paralyzed, listening to the muffled, distant melody. Then the ringing stopped. And a moment later Tyler's phone, still inside on the kitchen counter, lit up again. Another call. Unknown number. This time no one moved to answer it. We just stared at the glowing rectangle through the window, a beacon of terror in the dim cabin. It rang for a full minute, the light flashing, before going to voicemail. "We can't just leave it," Maya said, her voice firmer now despite the fear. "What if it is Tyler somehow? What if he's trying to communicate?" "Maya, it mimicked our voices," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "That's not Tyler." "But what if it is a recording?" she argued. "What if something happened to him and this is all that's left?" Her desperation was palpable. I could see the fresh tears tracking paths down her cheeks, glistening in the faint light. My eyes drifted to her mouth, those full, trembling lips. I wanted to kiss them, to stop the tears, to tell her everything would be okay, even though I knew it wouldn't. The thought was so strong, so sudden, it felt like a physical blow. "We need to go back in," she insisted. "We have to find out what's going on." Against our better judgment, we followed her. The cabin felt colder, darker, more menacing than before. The air was thick with unspoken dread. Tyler's phone was still on the counter, the screen now dark. "It went to voicemail," Dylan observed, picking it up. "Let's check the voicemail." Maya hesitated, then nodded. She tapped the voicemail icon. A moment of silence, then a familiar, automated voice. "You have one new message." Then a breath. A long drawn-out exhalation. And then my voice. My exact voice. "Hello?" it said, but it wasn't a question. It was a statement. A long drawn-out, echoing hello, that sounded like it was coming from a vast empty space, and then a low guttural chuckle, not human, not animal, something else. It was deep, rattling, and filled with a malice that turned my blood to ice. I dropped to my knees, my legs giving out. My hands flew to my ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was already in my head, echoing, twisting. That chuckle. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated evil. Maya screamed, a raw, primal sound that tore through the cabin. Vanessa was openly weeping, her body shaking uncontrollably. Marcus stood frozen, his face ashen, his eyes wide and vacant. Dylan, still holding the phone, looked like he'd seen a ghost. The voicemail ended, the cabin was silent again, but the silence was now terrifying. It felt like the cabin itself was holding its breath, waiting. "We need to get out of here," I gasped, scrambling to my feet. "Now. Forget Tyler. We need to leave." Maya, though still trembling, shook her head. "No. No, I can't. Not without him." Her eyes, swollen and red, darted around the room as if she expected Tyler to materialize from the shadows. "What if that thing has him? What if it's trapped him somewhere?" Her logic was skewed by grief and fear, but there was a desperate truth to it. We couldn't just abandon Tyler. But what could we do? We were unarmed, unprepared, and utterly out of our depth. We need to find the source, Marcus said, his voice surprisingly steady, though his hands were still shaking. That phone in the wall. If we can get to it, maybe we can figure out what's going on. It was a crazy idea, but it was the only idea we had. We grabbed whatever tools we could find in the cabin's small utility closet. A hammer, a screwdriver, a pry bar. Dylan, the strongest of us, took the hammer. It was right here, I said, pointing to the spot above the fireplace. Around here. Dylan tapped the wall. It sounded hollow. He took a deep breath, then swung the hammer. The plaster cracked, sending dust and debris flying. We all flinched, covering our faces. He hit it again, and a small hole appeared. No phone. Just darkness. He kept hitting, expanding the hole. The wood beneath the plaster splintered. We could see the rough-hewn beams of the cabin's frame, and beyond them, more darkness. It was a void. A space between the inner and outer walls. As Dylan worked, the air around us grew colder, perceptibly so. My breath misted in front of my face. The lights in the cabin, which had been steady until now, began to flicker, dimming and brightening erratically. The silence pressed in, punctuated only by the rhythmic thud of Dylan's hammer and the occasional creak of the old house. Suddenly the lights went out completely. We were plunged into darkness. Maya screamed again, a short, sharp sound. Vanessa started crying hysterically. Flashlights. I yelled, fumbling for the one in my pocket. Marcus and Dylan did the same. Beams of light cut through the inky blackness, dancing wildly as our hands shook. The hole in the wall was now a jagged opening, big enough to peer into. Dylan shone his light inside. Nothing, he muttered, his voice strained. Just insulation and empty space. Then a sound, a faint, almost imperceptible thump. It came from inside the wall, deeper in, and then the ringing started again. Tyler's ringtone. But this time it wasn't muffled. It was clear, loud, as if the phone was right there, just out of sight in the darkness of the wall. It's moving, Marcus whispered, his eyes wide with horror. It's moving through the walls. The ringing grew louder, closer, moving down the wall, away from the fireplace, towards the hallway. It sounded like it was gliding, unimpeded by the studs and plaster. It's in the walls, Maya gasped, her voice trembling. It's in the house. The ringing reached the hallway, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening. We stood frozen, our flashlights sweeping the empty space, casting long dancing shadows. Then from the hallway, we heard it, a whisper. My name. Asterisk. Narrator's name, asterisk. It was my voice, soft, insidious. It sent shivers down my spine. My whole body seized up. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Maya grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my flesh. Her face was inches from mine, her eyes wide and bloodshot. I could feel her breath on my cheek, quick and shallow. Her lips were parted, trembling. The fear was so intense, it was almost a physical presence between us, yet in that moment her closeness, the press of her body against mine, was the only thing grounding me. I wanted to pull her into me, to protect her, to hide us both from whatever unspeakable thing was in the walls. The urge was overwhelming, primal. What do you want? Dylan yelled, his voice cracking. He swung his flashlight beam wildly, trying to pierce the darkness of the hallway. The whisper came again, this time from the living room, near the front door. Asterisk Dylan asterisk. Then from the kitchen. Asterisk Vanessa asterisk. Then from the corner of the living room, right behind us. Asterisk Marcus asterisk. It was moving, circling us, calling out our names in our own voices, a horrifying chorus of mimicry. It was playing with us. It knows us, Vanessa whimpered, collapsing to the floor. It knows our names. The lights flickered back on, suddenly, blindingly bright for a moment, then stabilizing. The cabin looked the same, but it felt different, infested. We stared at each other, our faces pale, our eyes wide with terror. The silence returned, but it was no longer heavy. It was thin, stretched taut, like a membrane about to burst. We need to get out, I said, my voice barely a croak. Now, all of us. We can't stay here. This time, no one argued. We scrambled for the door, pushing past each other in a desperate dash for freedom. We burst out into the night, gasping for breath, the cold air a welcome shock after the suffocating dread of the cabin. We didn't stop running until we reached the SUV that I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, a blessed sound. Go! Go! Maya screamed, her voice raw as I slammed my foot on the accelerator, tearing down the dirt track, sending gravel flying that I didn't look back that no one did. We drove for what felt like hours, not speaking, not even breathing, just listening to the hum of the tires on the road and the frantic pounding of our own hearts that we didn't stop until we reached the highway, where the streetlights and the occasional passing car offered some semblance of normalcy. We pulled into the first gas station we saw, a brightly lit beacon in the darkness that we piled out of the car, our legs stiff, our bodies aching. Maya stumbled and I caught her, my hands gripping her arms, her skin was cold, clammy, her eyes were still wide, staring into the middle distance, seeing something I couldn't, her lips were still swollen from crying, a faint redness around them that I wanted to hold her, to pull her close and just keep her safe, but I knew I couldn't. Not really. Dylan called the sheriff from the gas station payphone, his voice still shaky but trying to sound calm, that he told them about Tyler, about the cabin, about the phone, that he left out the part about the voices, that he knew they wouldn't believe him. They promised to send a unit to check the cabin in the morning. We didn't go back to Lake Tahoe, that we drove straight through the night, back to the city, to our own homes, to the illusion of safety. Tyler was never found. The sheriff's department reported finding the cabin empty, undisturbed, no signs of a struggle, no phone in the wall. Nothing. Just an empty cabin waiting for its next renter. Sometimes late at night when the house is quiet, I think I hear it, a faint ringing, Tyler's ringtone, and then a whisper, my name. And sometimes when my phone rings and it's an unknown number, I hesitate, I let it ring, because I'm afraid of what voice might answer if I pick up, and I'm even more afraid of the voice that might be waiting on the other end, ready to mimic my own. Maya. Maya still calls me sometimes, that she's different now, quieter. The light in her eyes is dimmed, she still talks about Tyler, still hopes, but it's a hollow hope. The last time we met for coffee she wore a simple white t-shirt and jeans, her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her face, and I noticed the way the fabric of her shirt pulled taut across her chest when she leaned forward, her voice low and strained as she recounted another fruitless conversation with the private investigator she'd hired. Her hands, usually so expressive, were clasped tightly around her mug, her nails unpainted, almost bitten to the quick, that I saw the faint tremor in her fingers, the way her delicate wrist looked almost fragile, and I still felt it, that familiar, unwelcome surge of desire, mixed with a profound sadness for what she'd lost, and a chilling fear of what we'd all encountered, that it's a messy, unsettling cocktail of emotions that just lingers, like a bad taste in your mouth you can't get rid of. And I know, deep down, that something followed us home from that cabin, something that learned our voices, and it's still out there, listening, waiting.